vie, le gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans nos campagnes, mugissent ces féroces soldats, ils viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils et nos compagnes. Aux armes, citoyens, formez-les au bataillon. Marchons, marchons, qu'un sang impur abreuve nos sillons.
And that was the French legislator spontaneously singing La Marseillaise after a moment of silence remembering the 17 victims of France's recent jihadist terrorist attacks. Apparently one of the legislators began singing the country's national anthem and the rest of the chamber joined in. Welcome to the resistance. This is Forrest Wilson. Meanwhile, our president said yesterday the Paris attacks underscore how terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL, otherwise known as ISIS, have actively tried to inspire and support people within our own countries to engage in terrorism. Well, if they're inspiring others, what's inspiring ISIS and Al-Qaeda? I would like to recommend a book for you. That book is the Quran. I would recommend that you go online, find a English version of the Quran, and read as much of it as you can stomach. You know, waging jihad or terrorizing the infidel is a method of war for followers of Islam. But our leaders don't seem to understand this. We keep hearing them call Islam a peaceful religion. Well, since when were they experts on Islam? Do you see any warning signs? If you have people committing mass murder in the name of Allah, in the name of Islam, and the Prophet Muhammad, does it follow that there's a problem with Islam? And where are the moderate voices? There aren't any. There's no such thing as a moderate Muslim. I guess we're just to accept terrorism. This is the new normal. All the while, we get talk from our leaders of gun control. Have you noticed anything about gun control? It creates gun-free zones. Jack, do you know what a gun-free zone is? New York is a gun-free zone. And these places are favorite targets of terrorists. Today is January 17th, 2015. It's been almost 22 years to the day since January 25th, 1993. Jack, do you know what date that is? Do you have any idea? You sit here and listen to the show. Put your headphones on. This was the day of the first domestic terrorist attack in the United States. It's the day Miriam Al-Khanzi opened fire on CIA employees at the light in front of Langley, CIA headquarters on Route 23. And it was about 7:45 a.m. 4 years later, they captured Khanzi in Karachi, Pakistan, dressed as a woman. I'm not talking high heels and a sundress. I'm talking a burqa. They interrogated him, and he admitted some chilling details about the attack. First, they asked him, "Why'd you stop shooting?" His reply, "I had shot all the males at the light." The next question they asked him is, "Why CIA is a target?" His reply, "My choices that morning were the Israeli embassy or CIA headquarters. I chose the CIA because, get ready for this, I knew the CIA officials would be unarmed. Unarmed. And all they can talk about is how we can control guns. And they're doing it. Have you noticed any of these gun shows will not use PayPal? PayPal won't process the purchase of a weapon. I bet you didn't know that. This thing called Operation Choke Point from Eric Holder from the Justice Department. This was a Justice Department program to seize the bank accounts and shut off the bank accounts of legitimate gun dealers, gun shops, not to mention other shops, payday loan lenders, things that the Justice Department found objectionable. Anyways, a mere 32 days after the first domestic terrorist attack, January 25th, 1993, on February 26, 1993, Islamic radical terrorists detonated a bomb in the parking garage of the World Trade Center, killing 6 and injuring more than 1,000. 6 suspects were convicted of participating in the bombing. The 7th suspect, Abdul Rahman Yassin, is still at large. Still at large. I want you to understand something. If you take nothing more away from this program, Islam is not a religion of peace. That doesn't mean they're not peaceful Muslims. There are. They're considered cowards in Islam for not waging jihad against the infidels. Look, I've got friends everywhere, all over the globe. One of them, a dear friend of mine, is a Muslim. He married a Christian. I had a conversation with him and his imam, and his imam had left the mosque where they worshiped because it had become radicalized. And I'm not going to tell you any names or where this occurred, but I really didn't understand what we were talking about at the time. But to apostate is, in Islam, according to the Quran, for a Muslim to marry a Christian. It's punishable by death. And these two individuals, especially the imam, I asked him to come on the show. I don't think he will. He seemed very, how shall I say it, in fear. Look, to wage jihad and to strike terror in the hearts of the enemy is the goal of Islam. So if you take nothing else away, take that. Take it today. And our employees, our elected officials, they must not be reading the news, reading the National Intelligence Daily, the NID, the product of the intel community, or for that matter, picking up a newspaper. This insane campaign promise from the administration to close Gitmo. If America was paying attention, and I mean really paying attention to what's going on, we'd have a revolution in this country led by the People's House, the House of Representatives. But we now have an Islamic State in Afghanistan. Forget about Iraq and Syria. This is from Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, interviewed several months ago on this broadcast. Obama just keeps freeing more. These men are seasoned, trained, battle-hardened jihadis. What are they going to do? Open a deli? Freed Gitmo captive opens ISIS base in Afghanistan. Judicial Watch, January 15th, 2015. As President Obama frees droves of terrorists, he's let go half of them from Gitmo, including 5 Yemenis this week. You know, wasn't the attack on Charlie Hebdo carried out by radical jihadists inspired by American cleric in Yemen? Anyways, including 5 Yemenis this week from U.S. military prison in Guantanamo. News reports confirm that a Gitmo alum who once led a Taliban unit has established the first Islamic State of Iraq and Syria base in Afghanistan. His name is Mullah Abdul Rauf. And international and domestic media reports say he's operating in Helmand province. I thought one time we controlled Helmand province. He's actively recruiting fighters for ISIS. Citing local sources, a British newspaper writes that Rauf set up a base and is offering good wages. I wonder if it's a minimum wage. Good wages to anyone willing to fight for the Islamic State. Rauf was a corps commander for the Taliban's 1996 to 2001 rule of Afghanistan. We let this guy go, according to intelligence reports. After getting captured by U.S. forces, he was sent to Gitmo in southeast Cuba, but was released in 2007. I mean, I love this part. What are the seasoned, battle-hardened jihadis going to do after being released from Gitmo? Open a deli? All right, I got to take a break. I'll be back in a few minutes. But seriously, if you do nothing else, read the Quran. Find out what's going on. This is the inspiration for jihad. You're listening to Forrest Wilson, AM 600, WBOB FM 100.3. I'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
So if you don't do anything else, you've got to read the Quran. And I would recommend it for any of our elected officials. You listen to this. You've got feminists fighting a war on women. You've got vocal gays all concerned about equality in marriage. Meanwhile, Islamic fascist terrorists and just plain old followers of Islam are stoning adulterant women, beating women, and just plain denying women of a single freedom or right afforded to them in the West. Let me explain something to you about to the women in the audience about the Holy Quran. You are the equivalent of a beast of burden. You're nothing more than a goat. And the gays are faring really much worse than the women. They're being beaten, blindfolded, and thrown from the tops of buildings to their death just for being what Allah created them to be. After all, it's not their choice. Allah made them that way. So I don't expect women in our society and the gays in our society to fight against radical Islamic terrorists. No, I expect our employees to do that job. It's the least they can do. We hired them to uphold and defend our country, our Constitution, against all enemies. I mean, is radical Islam not an enemy? But they're concerned with Islamophobia and calling us Islamophobics. I want to get to our guest, who knows something about radical Islam and the left and the left's protection of the West. He's the author of the book American Left, Volume 3, the Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal. Mr. David Horowitz. David, welcome back to the Resistance.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the big problem is that we have a Democratic Party which is selling us down the river. This volume I've written called The Great Betrayal is about the greatest betrayal of America in its history by a major political party, which is the Democratic Party. After 9/11, Bush said that he put on warning all states that harbor terrorists and said, from this day on, if you are not for us, you're against us. And the Democrats set up a howl because they thought that was directed at them, when it was directed at countries like Yemen and Pakistan and the Palestinian entities, which all harbor terrorists. And he made this warning because a very weak country, a very backward country like Afghanistan, allowed Al-Qaeda to use it as a launching pad and took the lives of 3,000 Americans. It could have been 50 or 150,000 on that day.
Well, why is
the Democrats supported when Bush went into Iraq? He did so because Saddam Hussein, he had put Allahu Akbar in the flag of Iraq. He had murdered 300,000 of his own citizens. He had dropped poison gas on the Kurds, and of course on the Iranians. He had started 2 wars of aggression, swallowed the country of Kuwait, and had a massive nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons programs. When the United States defeated Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War in 1991, there was a truce that was sealed by 3 UN resolutions. Saddam, and these resolutions said that Saddam had allowed UN inspectors into his country. We destroyed his nuclear program at the time, but he had to allow UN inspectors so that we could see that he wasn't rebuilding his weapons programs, which he was determined to do. He violated those first 3, and then another 13 that made 16 UN Security Council resolutions he was in defiance of. Clinton had fired 450 cruise missiles into Iraq because of this, and signed the Iraqi Liberation Act. But when Bush went in, the Democrats, although their sympathies were against America, as they have been since the days of George McGovern, they voted to authorize the use of force. This is the famous 2002 use of force authorization that Obama is citing as his justifications for going into Syria and being in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
That's right.
So the Democrat leadership endorsed that. They gave eloquent speeches, Kerry and Clinton, on the floor of the Senate supporting it. But three months into the war, we went in March, toppled Saddam in April. In June, the Democrats turned 180 degrees against the war. They said our commander-in-chief of our forces in Iraq was a liar. Bush lied. People died. That the war was illegal, immoral, and unnecessary. In other words, we were war criminals. And they proceeded over the next 5 years to sabotage this war, leaking national security programs and thereby destroying them, attempting to defund our troops. This was treason. That's pure and simple what it was, and it was conducted by the leadership of the Democratic Party. I'm not talking about Occupy Wall Streeters and left-wing crazies. I'm talking about the leadership of the Democratic Party. Al Gore was another one who supported the war and then said it was illegal, immoral, and unnecessary.
Well,
David,
they're doing it again.
Against the war. It had nothing to do with what was going on in Iraq at the time. This is June 2003. It had to do with the fact that Democrats had a presidential primary and a left-wing anti-war radical from the 60s, Howard Dean, was running away with the nomination. That's when Kerry flipped. This wretched, despicable individual who is now our Secretary of State, who began his career by betraying his comrades in arms in Vietnam, Kerry flipped 180 degrees and led the attacks on Bush. And it wasn't like critiques of war policy. It was an attack on the morality of the war itself. Something that didn't happen until the McGovern years in the Democratic Party.
David, could you imagine if Saddam Hussein would have gotten a hold of a nuclear weapon? The devastation that this country
would have... He would be in possession of them now if Bush hadn't taken him down. Look, the Democrats are proud of what they did in Vietnam. What did they do? They forced America to stop supplying military and economic aid to the South Vietnamese and Cambodian regimes in January 1975. In April, both regimes fell to the communists, and they proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million people. But nobody holds them to account. The Republicans, the Bush administration, did not defend itself. They did not hold the Democrats' feet to the fire.
Well, now
they allowed the Democrats to take a good war, a necessary war, and turn it into a bad war. And then in doing that, the Democrats were able to turn their treason into patriotism because they opposed the bad war. No, the Iraq War was a good war. It was definitely mismanaged, but a lot of the mismanagement had to do with the fact that Bush was fighting a war on two fronts. Why didn't we pursue the chemical weapons and the Iraqi generals into Syria? Where do you think Assad got his chemical weapons? Why we didn't pursue them? Because the Democrats were in full mode attack on the war as an evil war. This had never happened when America faced foreign enemies before. Now we have in the White House a president who identifies with our enemies. You know, of course,
who may be a follower of the Quran.
Well, yes.
And, we've got a similar situation going on with Iran.
Stop from talking about the Quran and Islam in the same breath with Christianity and Judaism. In Christianity, its savior was a carpenter, a man of peace who never hurt a fly. Muhammad was a bloodthirsty warrior who committed genocide, and in particular genocide against the Jews of the Quraysh tribe, wiping out every man, woman, and child. And you know, when you say things like this, they say, well, in the Old Testament, Joshua, killed all the Amalekites. Well, there's a big difference. There are no Amalekites in the world today. But there are Jews and Christians and other assorted infidels that Muhammad has instructed his followers to murder.
And they keep saying that ISIS is inspiring young people in this country to commit holy jihad. Well, who's inspiring ISIS? It's the Holy Quran.
Well, of course, this is an ideology. It's a religious fanaticism that we're facing. That's what recruits them. And that's why when the President of the United States refuses to associate Islam with this terrorism, he's working for the enemy. That's what he's doing. It's like pretending that it wasn't Germany that was carrying out the atrocities, or Japan in World War II.
Right.
These were individual criminals.
That's it.
That we had to try in American courts. I mean, come on. Well, this country is so... It's had 30 or 40 years of left-wing ideology, which is called political correctness. So it's brain dead at this point. It's half the country's brains are glued up.
What's the motivation of the Democrats and the progressives? Why are they motivated to lie to us when it comes to radical jihad? We got to take a break. I want you to answer that question on the other side of the break, if you will. We'll be right back. We're talking to David Horowitz. He's the author of The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal. And it's in a series of volumes. This is the third. I highly recommend the book, as well as the Holy Quran. You're listening to The Resistance. This is Forrest Wilson. We'll be right back with David Horowitz.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Okay, we're back talking to David Horowitz. The book is The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal. And David's got a great website, too. I want you to go visit it. It's Front Page. David, give the website. Is it Front Page
Front Page Magazine, but you can abbreviate the magazine and call it Front Page Mag.com.
.com.
And another website, well, you can get all our websites off that. Truth Revolt is another one we have.
Truth Revolt, and then jihadwatch.org is another.
Yeah,
that's another great website. You've done a tremendous amount of work in these areas. And my question to you before the break was, why is the Democrat Party, the progressives, and the leftists invested in this narrative that Islam is a religion of peace?
Because they're driven by a fantasy. The Democratic Party was captured by the left in the 70s and 80s. Bill Clinton, embarrassment that he was not an ideologue. But his party is a subsidiary of the political left, and the left is driven by a fantasy. A left is a crypto religion to replace traditional religions. That's why they're hostile to Christmas and all forms of religion. And the left believes that like a true religion, that the earth is a fallen place. And there will be a redemption. But unlike traditional religions, for them, the redemption comes not from a divinity, but from them. So they see a future, they call it social justice now. It used to be called communism and socialism. They see a future in which people are not like the people that we've known for 3,000 years. They're completely equal. They're peaceful. The only thing that makes them fight each other is private property. This is the delusion that they're under.
So we've got to do away with private property.
And so they see any enemy of the United States as a kind of friend, as somebody that's oppressed. They excuse all the crimes, for example, of the Palestinians. I mean, the Palestinians, who didn't exist in 1948. They were Arabs who happened to live in the region of the Jordan, and they were given land by the UN. Israel doesn't occupy Palestinian or Arab land. It occupies land that was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, who are not Arabs, for 400 years. Arabs have less of a claim on Israel than American Indians have on the United States, or Mexicans for that matter. That's how remote their claim is. And they have conducted a war of aggression unprovoked against the Jews for now over 60 years. But when people on so-called progressives see the Palestinians, I should say that progressives are deeply racist. So when they see a Palestinian who has brown skin and is not white, they see somebody who is automatically oppressed and deserving sympathy. And the Democratic Party is the same. Well, look, Nancy Pelosi, whose idol, by her own words, was Harry Bridges, who most of your audience will not remember, but he was a Soviet agent, Harry Bridges. That's her hero, which he declared on the floor of the House. But, of course, nobody notices anymore because we live in such a left-wing universe. But Nancy Pelosi has just appointed a candidate, a congressman, whose money comes from the Muslim Brotherhood to the Intelligence Committee, Andre Carson of Indiana. This just happened this last week. The Democratic Party is a treacherous party, and nobody should vote for Democrats until they, learn the lesson at the polls and start expelling their leftists. They kicked Joe Lieberman basically out of the party because he was a man of principle, even though he was a liberal. But the rot inside the Democratic Party is deep, and it's the main enemy, in my view. This enemy within is the main problem the United States faces in the war on terror, because we can defeat the terrorists. That's not a problem, but not if we have a commander-in-chief like Barack Obama.
Well, and the problem for the leftists is if the jihadists ever gotten control, they'd be the first one killed.
Well, yes. And there's actually a very interesting book. It's called Reading to Lolita in Tehran. Reading Lolita in Tehran. It's by a woman who was an Iranian exchange student in Oklahoma in the 70s. Belonged to the Iranian Students Club, which was run by literal communists, Iranian communists. And when the Ayatollah Khomeini was brought into power by Jimmy Carter, who brought him out of exile in France and also undermined the Shah to allow the mullahs in Iran to take control of the country. When that happened, they all went back to Iran thinking, now this is liberated Iran, liberated from the yoke of course, white Western imperialism. And one by one, and she was an English teacher, so she was teaching Lolita in Tehran at the time. One by one, she watched her classmates, the members of the Iranian Student Society, the leftists that had gone back, be executed by the Ayatollah. Because, the Ayatollah had said loud and clear, I'm taking Iran back into the 7th century. That's what he said over and over again. But the people on the left are, as I said, they have their brains glued up by this illusion of the socialist, social justice future, and where America is the great Satan and Israel, of course, the little Satan. These are actually terms that the Ayatollah came up with. That's what drives them. They don't see anything else. They're blind. And they got themselves killed. And yes, you're absolutely right. If Islam is in control, all those Harvard leftists, all those Ivy League, all those, college students out in the streets, calling for America to hang its white cops, they're all going to be killed, and they'll be the first ones.
By the way, Carson was a cop. He converted to Islam, and he's made some really outrageous statements. And Pelosi is determined to get this guy on the House Intelligence Committee. Yeah. It just doesn't. He would be considered a spy in any other age.
Right, or in any other country in this age.
Well, that's true.
We're the only country in the world let alone major country, which has a major party trying to dismantle, or they actually successfully dismantled our borders, where people don't think we need borders, secure borders.
Well, it's
but
amazing.
The Democratic Party, it's a treasonous party, has done that and continues to do that, and Barack Obama's got another 2 years in a captive left-wing press.
I'm not sure we've got another 2 years. He may have another 2 years, but I'm not sure we, the American people, have another 2 years.
That's the $64,000 question, my friend.
Yeah, and I think we're headed towards another terrorist attack with these open borders, and apparently...
Well, each one awakens more people. I think there are more people who are onto what's happening now. People like me, have been doing this. I wrote my first book about the alliance between the left and the Islamists, called Unholy Alliance, 11 years ago. We used to be a very embattled minority. I mean, marginalized, despised, denounced as Islamophobes. Since ISIS beheaded those Americans and English and the Brits,
journalists,
mass America has waked up. Well, the network news can't avoid these stories, and so they come into everybody's living room. And it was like during the Cold War. While the intellectual elites, and collegiate liberals, so to speak, all were talking about the Soviet Union being a bad superpower, just like the United States, moral equivalence, apologizing for Soviet crimes. Your man in the street and woman in the street, they knew what the score was. And I think most Americans, they understand. Of course it's about Islam, and of course they're savages, and of course they're a terrible threat. I think the majority of Americans understand that in their gut, because they didn't go to Harvard and didn't get their brains screwed up with these fantasies.
It's amazing what Harvard has become. But back to this guy that Pelosi is trying to get on. I was looking for one of his quotes, and here it is. It says and he was speaking to a convention. It says, it's unfortunate that there are those who are thinking that at this convention right now we're having secret meetings, that we're plotting to destroy this country. Now, this is a representative of Congress, but I say to those who are here undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us. And my question is, stop them from what?
Well, I believe that was a conference organized by Muslim Brotherhood Fronts. Look, every major Muslim organization in America, the Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim American Society, the Council on American Islamic Relations, they're all fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood, all of them. And Hillary Clinton's right hand while she was Secretary of State and the chief advisor on Muslim affairs was Huma Abedin, who comes from a family of Muslim Brotherhood leaders, and she herself is a Muslim Brotherhood operative. And Obama supported the Muslim Brotherhood, if you'll remember, in Egypt. I mean, we now have a government in Egypt which is saying that we can't allow Islam, the world thinks that we want to murder 6 billion people, all the infidels. And we can't allow this. And Obama has done everything to stop this Egyptian government, which is anti-jihad, to come to power and to stay in power. He gave $1.5 billion and 16 fighter bombers to the Muslim Brotherhood when they briefly controlled Egypt. That's who our president is.
Well, he's...
The woman who's running Obama, Valerie Jarrett, is an Iranian communist, for crying out tears.
Yes.
David Axelrod also comes from a family of communists. And, as somebody, I was brought up by communists, I can tell you, when you realize that you're a part of a movement that is evil, the first thing you want to do, and the most important, is to warn other people about the dangers of this movement. You never hear Valerie Jarrett or David Axelrod warning about the dangers of the communist left And that's because they're still part of it.
And the enemy of my enemy is my friend, us being the enemy of communism and Islam.
Well, but communism is not their enemy.
Exactly.
They see communism as a movement for social justice that was maybe distorted and needs to be brought back. You know, we used to say in the 60s, when I was on the left, we used to say the first socialist revolution will be in the Soviet Union, because we believe that by taking over the means of production, by taking over private property, by redistributing income, they had done all the right things. The only problem was they didn't have a political democracy. Well, why didn't they have a political democracy? Because when you eliminate private property, you eliminate democracy. Private property is a power of the individual to resist the state. And everything that Democrats do is to increase the power of the state and decrease the freedom of the individual. And it bothers me that the Republican Party will not say this about, for example, Obamacare. Obamacare is the greatest attack on individual freedom in our lifetimes. They take away your right to your doctor and your health care plan and force you into a government program. They have taken away your power over your own life. These are life and death questions, health. And if the government has a menu of what you are allowed, how you are allowed to treat yourself, they're taking away your freedom over your own life. That's why you oppose Obamacare, not just because it raises individual, not because it raises individual premiums, which it does, but because it takes away your freedom.
Absolutely. Well, the book
That's the battle. Individual freedom versus the communists, collectivists. You can call them collectivists. It's more polite. But the Democratic Party is a party of communists, not the people who vote, since communists, the thing that communists are best at is deception. They never say what their true agendas are. I mean, Obamacare was sold as covering the uninsured. They said, there are, what did they say, 30, 40 million uninsured?
So they destroy the system so they can get 30 or
5 billion.
Yeah.
And you know who those 5 billion are? They're people who are getting free medical care at the expense of taxpayers.
Right. Who could already have gotten it anyways?
They want everybody on the dole.
Yeah.
We have so many people who are dependent now who don't want to work because they're getting all these government goodies.
Well, I think you hit on something that's very important. The Democrats are aligned with Islam, and just like Islam, they will conceal and deceive in order to gain power.
Their first order of business is deception.
Right.
They call themselves liberals. Why do conservatives call them liberals when they're bigoted? They hate Christians. They hate white people. Come on.
Yes.
How
do you know that
in Ferguson, Missouri, you have, and now in the streets of America, you have these lynch mobs. They are lynch mobs. They want to hang cops because they're white. Darren Wilson's crime was to have been white. How many people would attack a police officer, an armed police officer, in his police car and try to seize his weapon? And what kind of a person is that? Yeah. That is somebody who is a danger to that policeman's life, and when he shoots him, that's called justifiable homicide.
Yeah, and they're a threat to society as well.
And you have all these people led by the President of the United States and the Attorney General in the streets saying, we want that cop tried and convicted and punished because he's white. That's called racism.
Well, look, the
President of the United States, nobody will say this, Barack Obama is a racist.
He is a racist.
How is it possible that his chief advisor on race relations is the nation's leading lynch mob leader and racist himself, Al Sharpton, if the president himself is not a racist? Of course he is.
They're agitating black and white Americans just like imams agitate.
I am sick and tired of the limp-wristed Republican Party. Where, I mean, nobody has the courage to say it's worse than the emperor has no clothes. The emperor is a racist.
Absolutely.
And he's an anti-American.
And they agitate just like an imam.
With our Islamic enemies.
Okay, David, we got to take a break. I really appreciate you coming on. The book is The Black Book of the American Left, Volume 3, The Great Betrayal, David Horowitz. David, thank you again. Your website is frontpagemag.com if you want to read more about what's going on in the left and Islam. Also check out jihadwatch.com. David, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
You're listening to The Resistance, Forrest Wilson, AM 600, FM 100.3. If you want to call in, 222-TALK, 904-222-8255. We'll be right back to take some of your calls and finish the hour.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Well, that was passionate, Mr. David Horowitz. I hope you'll go to his website. Really amazing coverage and journalism by the great journalists over there. He's right, though. Our president is a racist. And all of the race hustlers, including him, are agitating, in particular, young black males, and also whites, just like imams are agitating radical jihadists. I ran across this article. It's on National Review online, and it's by Joel, I can't pronounce his name, Joel Gerke. And it says, an expert at the Law Library of Congress, a nonpartisan branch of the Library of Congress, has advised Congress and the Supreme Court since 1832, tackled a slightly different question of recent. What would George III, King George III, do when faced with a law he didn't like? Not even the King of England at the time of the American Revolution had the authority to suspend laws unilaterally. The law library expert wrote in a memorandum to the Senate committee tasked with responding to the president's recent executive orders on the enforcement of immigration law. 100 years before the American Revolution, another British king had attempted to suspend a number of laws 100 years before, contributing to the onset of the Glorious Revolution in England. A senior foreign law specialist at the Law Library writes in the memo to the Senate Judiciary Committee, King George III, the specialist goes on to remind the committee, was thus unable to enact or repeal any laws unilaterally without the involvement of Parliament. So our king apparently has more power than the king that we revolted against over 200 years ago. And my question is, where do we get one of these parliaments? I'd like to know. Jack, where do we get a parliament? I hope you'll listen to the show again next week. Thank you for listening today. You're listening to Forrest Wilson, The Resistance, AM 600, FM 100.3, The Answer.